Hey guys, Matt here. This is my review of The Kingsman. This movie is directed by Matthew Vaughn, who previously did Kick-Ass, X-Men First Class, and the other two Kingsman films. This movie stars Ray Fiennes, Harris Dickinson, Gemma Arterton with Jamon Hansu, and Rhys Ifans. Now, the plot of this film, it takes place in the early 1900s, so this is a prequel to the other Kingsman films. It's about a man named the Duke of Oxford, played by Ray Fiennes, who has a son named Conrad. And he's trying to protect his son after a family tragedy. He's trying to protect him from the horrors of the world and everything that it involves. Meanwhile, he's trying to stop these villains from essentially starting World War I. Now, if you're going to go into this film expecting it to be fun action like the other two Kingsman films, you're going to be disappointed because this is less of a movie that's between Austin Powers and James Bond and more of a drama about a man trying to protect his family. Yeah, there are some fight scenes and some action and guns in it, but it's not the Kingsman that you know. Let me start with the acting in this film. The acting, for the most part, is okay, only because the talented actors involved aren't given a whole lot to work with. They're either over the top, or they're given little to work with, and they're very just there. Ray Fiennes is still the best actor alive today to never win an Oscar. Here, he's very soft-spoken and calm, very gentlemanly, like how Colin Firth was in the other Kingsman movies. Ray Fiennes is definitely at his best when he's emotional, whether it's sad or angry. Jamon Hansu, I still love to see him in things every now and then, and he's really good, but here, again, not given much to work with. He's the butler, Shallow, and he's really good with knives. He helps the son train, and he's a good right-hand man for the Duke. Gemma Arterton as the maid, Polly. Again, she fleshes out his character a little more, but she's not given a whole lot to do. She pops up here and there, but you really can't describe her character in more than 4 words. Conrad, played by Harris Dickinson, is the Duke's son. And unfortunately, he kind of falls into the bland son category, where it's like you have this son that wants to do more, wants to go out and see the world, get involved in danger, and just kind of get outside his father's bubble. The movie primarily focuses on the villains. The villains in this film are set up like a James Bond Spectre type thing, where you have this guy at the head of the table with all these villains surrounding it. Some of those villains include a character played by Daniel Bruhl, who's very underutilized in this movie, as well as Rhys Ifans, who plays Rasputin. He's very over the top. And they all have their little rings, and so the movie tends to focus more on history and these villains, which are realistic, as opposed to the fictional heroes. This movie kind of runs into the same problem as X-Men First Class did, where you had the X-Men involved in this real-life situation, and they tried to tie in these fictional characters with the real-life situation of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and it just kind of felt weird. It's like, where do you draw the line between our story and where we're going to go with it, and what happened in real life? Tom Hollander is also in this movie. He plays 3 different roles. He plays the King of England, high-ranking guy in Germany, and the Tsar in Russia. He plays the head of all 3 of those countries. Also, this film has a lot of cameos. A couple are blink and you'll miss them cameos, like Stanley Tucci, but others are like, wow, I didn't expect to see this person. It was like you're watching the first Kingsman movie with Mark Hamill popping up. The first one also had David Covington and Michael Caine. This one has Charles Dance, has Matthew Good, has Aaron Taylor Johnson, and as I mentioned before, Daniel Bruhl. So there's a lot of familiar faces in this movie, but unfortunately, it's like they cast all of them to make up for the weak story. And because this is a Kingsman origin story, you're not going to get the fast-paced, fun action that you did in the 2 previous films. One, because this takes place in the early 1900s, so technology is not as advanced yet. But also, the gadgets and all that fun stuff doesn't exist yet. It's not established. Yes, there are a couple nods, references, quotes to the Kingsman movies, especially how you find out the origins of the King Arthur names and stuff like that. But unfortunately, the weakest part of this movie is that Kingsman aspect. The Kingsman group, organization, everything you know and love doesn't get set up until very late in the film. Also, Matthew Vaughn likes to throw in some surprises in his films, like in Kick-Ass, and this movie has one of them that's very, I'll just say, like, out of place. There's a scene where Rasputin meets the Duke of Oxford. But in order to set up this meeting, the Duke and his son must do something that are kind of questionable. And yes, it does lead to a pretty cool sword fight, but it's seen as very cringy because you have the Duke in a very compromising situation with Rasputin, and it's just kind of weird. Aside from that, that's the most exciting scene in this movie, which is says a lot. So because the acting is good for what it's worth, there was a whoa surprise towards the third act in the film. It's kind of like they wanted to recreate the, I'll say, outside the church scene in the first film, but even though it's shocking and surprising and makes you go, oh wow, I wonder where the story's going to go now, it's kind of like, is that the story arc you wanted to go? Is that the direction you wanted to take this film? Because it made it go from realistic drama to like super realistic and somber, and it didn't feel like a Kingsman movie. This should have been a TV show. I mean, thankfully, this was the third film in the franchise, and this wasn't the first one. I'm glad they didn't make these in order, because this would have been a pretty poor start. So, because this had the name Kingsman, it had origin things and nods and references and good actors, but it had a weak storyline that focused more on actual history and its villains, as opposed to the good guys that you want to root for. I'm going to give The Kingsman a C. So until next time, guys, see ya.